Welcome back to Board Game Breakdown. I am Kristofer Solomon here with another video, and today we are going to be looking at the last installment in the South Tigris trilogy, which is called Inventors of the South Tigris. So before we get started, this is a pretty long video. We're going to explain all the ins and outs of playing this game, specifically on the solo mode. So if you're looking for maybe just an overview video, you can click our link here for our burst edition, which is going to be probably 3 or 4 minutes and just give you a quick overview of exactly what you're getting when you buy Inventors and bring it to the table. But if you want to stay right here for this video, then we're going to cover a whole lot of stuff. We're going to cover setting up the full game, again in solo mode, though I will give you some tips on how it differs from multiplayer. So if you are going to play this with a partner or other people, then keep watching. I think there'll be plenty of information for you in this video as well. We're going to break down the 4 main actions in the game, which are invent, build, test, and publish. And then we will look at some of the other actions up here on the main board and on your player board, and then we'll play a few rounds and I'll show you how the AI player works that you're going to play against in the solo mode. Inventors has a lot of dice that you'll be using, so if you are familiar with any of the other South Tigris titles, you'll know that they all have dice and there's different ways to manipulate them. You'll be using workers and these craftspeople to help you do those 4 actions. Move a boat down a river, place tents around in the city, and try to gain influence in the different guilds on the board, which if you're familiar with Wayfarers or Scholars, those 2 titles, you'll definitely understand the influence mechanic in this game. So before we go any further, I'd like to ask that you please go to boardgamebreakdown.com. That's the website where we have written reviews. We also have links to the videos. You can comment, you can chat with us, however you want to engage, so go there. And you can also check us out on Mastodon or Instagram. Those are the 2 social media platforms we use. Check us out there, and make sure to leave us a comment on what you think of the videos or any other games that you might want to see some how-to play videos created. So without any further ado, let's get started with Inventors of the South Tigris. Alright, so we are going to start off with setting up the main board, and then we'll jump into a chapter on setting up your personal board. Like many of the games we've done recently, it takes up a whole lot of space. So hopefully we'll get everything into the frame here as we set it up, but you're going to notice a blank space down here. That's going to be taken up by a lot of these device boards over here, and then our player board will go here. So I've set out a few things. So first, you've got your board up here. It's only one-sided, so you'll play that side every time. And I've put out a few other things that we'll get into. But first, I want to mention that, as I said in the intro, this is for the solo game. So a lot of the setup is going to be the same for solo as it would be in multiplayer, but we're concentrating on solo. But I'll call out a few things that you can keep the same. So the first thing we're going to do is to set up our device boards down here. So you have all these device boards. They look like this on one side. There's some information here in the middle. Up on the top left, we'll get into that, but they're each slightly different with some different scoring opportunities, things like that. So you'll shuffle them all up. And then for a solo game, you're going to place 3 in this first column here. If you're doing a multiplayer game, you could do 4, and in the second column, you'll end up placing 1. But just keep those differences in mind when it comes to solo versus multiplayer. So those are our starting devices. We're going to do a few things with that in just a second that have to do with these device cards. So you'll shuffle these up. This is the back side. This is what the front side looks like. Again, we'll talk about those in more depth. But for this first setup, you're going to flip over 1 and place it here. And then you'll flip over a second and place it here. So this is our first invented device. And this one over here is our first built device. Okay, so because this one is built, you're going to take, you have this single black influence token. It's a neutral token, but you're going to place it here on the device board to show that it has been built, but it hasn't been built by you or the AI. It's been built by a neutral player. And you also have a second one if you're playing multiplayer, and you would place it here on the second card if there were one. And you're also going to take two of these, and so these are neutral invention tokens. And you'll see that they've got blue, gold, and black to represent the three types of dice and the three minarets up there. Those colors are the main colors of the game, but we're going to just draw two of those randomly out of the stack. So we'll use two of them, and the third one that didn't get used can go back in the box. And one of them is going to go this side up, which is the side that shows that you've invented a card, and we're going to place it right here. And then the other one you're going to flip on the back, and it should look like this. And it's going to go here because that's what happens when you build. So that'll make more sense as we talk about the different actions. But you're basically starting the game with a neutral invented card. These two device boards down here have no inventions on them yet, and then a neutral built invention here. So that's kind of how you start the game out with those right there. So the rest of your cards, you're going to sit them here for a minute. We'll be dealing some of those out to the players when we get started. But let's look at these items that we have here first. So we'll grab this guy. He is a black neutral worker, and he is called the Envoy. And he's going to go into his little spot up here at the top of the board. And we'll explain the Envoy more later. Next in that row, next to the Envoy, you'll see some rectangles. You have these things called pass tiles. They have this on the back side, different things on the front. You're just going to shuffle them up, and you're going to draw 5 of them. So we'll do that now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, the ones that you don't use can go back into the box. And then we're going to take those and randomly place them out into these little spots here. So every game, these will be different depending on which 5 you drew. All right, that is now done. So if you look here at these tiles, you'll see that I've already made these 3 stacks of what is called the research tiles. So there's 3 different kinds. You can tell by their backs. They have some different symbols on them. This is sort of like a recycling symbol. So you have a stack of those. You have this stack that has a tent on the backside. And then the last one has a lightning bolt on the backside of these research tiles. So you would just make these stacks at the beginning of the game, place them here where they would belong, like so. So I've already handled that. We don't really need to do any more of that. Next, you'll take your workshop tokens that have a brown background. There are some gray ones. I'll show you here. They have a back like this. They're going to be used for when you do your player board setup, so you can just set those aside. Once you get all your brown ones separated, there's a space down here in the lower right hand corner that has some emblems on it. You're going to grab 9 of your brown tiles randomly, and you will count those out, and then you'll stick them on that last space that we just pointed out. And then if you look down the river, each spot has a little emblem on it that is basically the workshop tile emblem. And sometimes it has nothing except one emblem, which means no matter how many people are playing, you're going to put 1 down. But sometimes it says like 4 players need 2. Sometimes if you don't have a slash and a 1, then you'll use what's on the left side. So we're just going to take these and fill them up as the emblems point out. So for example, on this first spot to the right, 2 go here, 1 goes here. That is if we're playing solo. 1 goes here, 1 goes there. So you're just going to fill up the river based on your player count. We are setting this up for solo again, so we'll use that side of the slash. So filling up our last section here, and 1 goes here. All right. So once you're done, all of the brown tiles that you did not use get put back into the box. They will not be needed throughout the rest of the game. You have this, which is your first player token. You're going to be first player in the solo game, so you can hold on to that. All right, so that is what you do with the main board. There'll be a few other things we throw out there, but they kind of coincide more with your personal player board. So we'll rearrange this, and we'll make sure we have enough space, and we'll jump right into the individual board. All right, welcome back. We have grabbed one of the individual player boards. You'll see here again, it's only one-sided, so you don't have to worry about, choosing one of the different sides to play. You just throw it down and get playing. Some games you have to do that, but this one, you only have the one side. So if you're playing solo, which is again the main focus of this video, the AI opponent does not need a board of its own, only you do. But obviously if you're playing multiplayer, then each person needs a board. So you're going to see a couple different colors of pieces out, and we'll go into that more. But for this game, we're going to play as the blue character, and I'll just grab all my stuff and dump all my stuff out right here. We'll organize it here shortly. All right, so you're going to have a couple things here. You're going to have tents, which are these larger pieces. You should have 4 of those, so we'll separate those out right here. You should have 3 workers. And then lastly, you should have a ship. And then you will have a token like this, that is your royalty token. So you will have one of those, and you're going to end up placing it up there on that track. And then lastly, you will have a bunch of these influence tokens. They look like little asterisks. And if you've played any of the other South Tigris games, maybe Wayfarers of South Tigris or Scholars of South Tigris, you'll definitely recognize these as they're used across just about all of those games. All right, so first we're going to grab our ship token. It's going to go on space 1 of the river over here. And you're going to take your royalty token and place it here on the 0. So that's done. Second, we're going to grab those 4 tents that we talked about earlier, and we're going to place them where they need to go. Since we're playing solo, you do need to grab one of these camel tiles, and it's going to go right here on our main board. But you'll see that the side tells you if you should use it for 1 or 2 players, 3 players, and if you're playing with 4, you just use what's printed on the board. So depending on how many players you're using, you're going to flip that on its right side, and then your tents are going to just cover up each of those 4 spots. Of our 3 workers, we're going to start out with 2 of them, and the other one we'll just put it to the side. You'll get this eventually when you start putting your tents out. I think it is the second or third round, but we'll talk about that when we get to it, and then we'll deal with all the influence tokens in a minute. So you also have some tiles that are in the same color of whatever color you're using. So let me grab these out. And the first 2 I'm going to show you are 2 tiles that have camels on them. So there's 2 of them here. One of them has a little arrow on it, kind of looks like maybe it's telling you to flip the camel. And then one of them has a plus symbol. The backside has some more spots to place dice, but you'll just put them here on the board. And then we're going to look at our invention tiles. So they look very similar to those that we placed out with our neutral tiles earlier, but you will see that you have your color on them. So we're just going to shuffle them up, and we're going to place them at the bottom right of our board in whatever order you kind of pull them out of your hand. And we'll discuss more on that later, but just kind of randomly put them in the 6 spots down here on the board. All right, so next you have your tower tiles. So these should have a number on the side to 7 on the back side. So you're going to get them in order, starting with 1 down at the bottom of the tile, and you're just going to place them in order going up. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then eventually we'll flip those over, and it will continue to go up as we play. So every player has tiles like this. They all match. They're all the same. There's no difference in them. So you don't have to worry about someone starting out with better tower tiles than you or anything like that. All right, so before we get our resources and stuff, let's look at what else we need for the other players. So you're going to have your AI player. And in this instance, we are going to use red. So here are the AI player stuff. So it basically needs a ship, it needs the tents, it needs all 3 of its workers, and it needs all of its influence tokens. So the only thing it does not need that matches your setup is the royalties tracker. It doesn't care about the royalties, so don't worry about it. It also doesn't need its own board like we mentioned earlier. It doesn't need the tower tiles. So we'll put that there. And then you have what's called a dummy player. And the dummy player should have a ship. It should have 1 tent. And the ship goes over there at the start of the river. And we'll go and throw the red one over here because I forgot to put him over there. And so again, you'll have your 1 tent for the dummy and then 12 influence tokens. So count those out or just grab the whole thing and use what you need. Oh, and then I forgot one more thing about the red player is it will need its invention tiles. So the ones that we set up down in the bottom right-hand corner, grab those for the red one. You just make a stack and place them in a pile near his stuff. All right, so there'll be some cards, or actually first let's talk about these tiles. They go with the dummy player. So for right now, you're just going to stick them over here with his stuff, and we'll lay those out on the first round. You have a set of dummy cards. I believe there's 6. So you'll just shovel those up, place it next to the dummy stuff at the moment. And then you'll be left with a set of cards for the AI player. So there are 2 different colors on the front. You've got worker meeple cards here, kind of in a teal bluish, and then you have dice emblem cards that are kind of in a yellow. So for right now, you're just going to separate those into the 2 different stacks. You can shuffle them up, and then we're just going to place them over here for the time being. When it's actually the AI player turn, we'll go more into what you have to do with these. And then the last thing we're going to do is grab up our starting resources. So the way that's going to start is you're going to need to grab up these, I don't exactly remember what they're called, I guess starter cards. They look like this. The backside is if you're playing a shorter game. So like that's not important for us right now. We're going to play the regular game. But you're going to shuffle those up, and then you're just going to draw one out of the stack. So we drew this one. And you're going to basically start at the top here and just work your way down grabbing the stuff. So this top line here shows us what influence we're going to put into the guilds or the minarets, whatever you want to call it to start with. So we have 2 blues, an orange or a yellow, and a black. So we're going to grab our influence tokens. Remember, those are the asterisk tokens. And we're going to just put them up here, 2 in the blue, 1 in the yellow, 1 in the black. All right, second on the card, you're going to grab the colored dice that you see here. And there's a little book emblem behind it, meaning it's going to go into the study. And the study is a section on your board. So we're going to grab 1 blue dice. It does not need to get rolled, as it will be rolled once it comes out of your study. So don't worry about that. Just stick a blue dice there. All right, next we're going to grab an orange dice and 5 white dice, and we're going to put them in the level with the little moon. That is the ready level on the board. And so you'll see that same emblem down here in this little section. So you have an exhausted section, which is the black. You have your ready section, which is one above that. Then you have your next section, which now I don't remember the name of it, and that's going to be annoying. And then the top section, I believe, is inspired. So let's look at the map here. Okay, so it's exhausted, ready, determined, and inspired. So those are levels. So again, let's grab our card. We're going to grab an orange dice and 5 white dice and put them in our ready area. And because these are going into our ready area, we are going to roll them. So I'll grab all my dice up here, and then we'll give them a good roll. See what we come up with. These are all pretty low values, but whatever. All right, next thing, we are getting a black die and 3 white die, which are going into the exhausted zone at the bottom. So those don't need to be rolled because when they come out of the exhausted zone, they will be rolled at that point. So just grab the amount of die we talked about, stick them down there in the bottom. And then lastly, you'll see one of those gray starting workshop tiles we talked about. So you're going to grab your stack and you're going to find the one that matches that, and you're going to pull it out of the stack, and that will be your starting workshop tile. So let's look through here and find it. All right, you can stick it in one of your starting workshop rows. So down here is the workshop. You've got 3 different rows right here that you can use. So we'll just be placing this one in one of our rows. Once you learn how to play, you'll definitely know better about how that works. So we'll just put it here, start it there. We'll talk about that more in a second. And then the last thing you're going to use your little starter resource card for is over here on the right when you look at your craftspeople. So everyone starts with the same craftspeople, but they go into different levels of the tower, and you'll see a number right here. So he'll go into the 4th level, the 2nd level, so on and so forth. If you see them with this little green refresh circle, that means they get they start readied, and then those 2 that were in the 2nd level start exhausted, which means they're going to be flipped over and you can't use them until you refresh them. So I'm going to go grab my craftspeople and set out the little pile over here. So here's another close-up of what the craftsperson icon actually looks like on the token itself. So we're going to just set them each in their level according to the card. And remember, those 2 that were in level 2 get flipped over, like this black one, and this blue one will get flipped over as they are not ready. So each craftsperson has a certain job, I guess. The little emblems tell you what they are, like a person that chops wood, so on and so forth. I don't remember all the names. It doesn't really matter. All right, so then there's a little helper card you can grab, a player aid, and then the back of this card here gives you the starting resources for depending on how many players and in-game scoring. So remember, we are the first player. For solo mode, you're always the first player. So we're going to grab our resources that were on there, which is 2 device cards. Here's the 2 cards. And we need 2 coins. So we'll grab those out of here. So here are 2 coins. I'll stick them up here in this little bank. And then a couple things with the AI player is they do have starting influence. And you're going to just take 1 influence and put it in each guild. So they'll basically start with 1. The dummy will also put influence in, but that will happen at the start of the first round officially. So we've done the main board device. The main board. We've done the device boards. We've done our board. We've talked about what we need for the dummy player. We've talked about what we need for the AI player. So the game is now set up. We're ready to jump into the first round. Before we do that, we'll take some time to actually explain the 4 main actions, which are inventing, building, testing, which doesn't have a little icon up here, and publishing. So we'll kind of talk through these, what they each mean. We'll play a couple of rounds and explain what's going on with the rest of the board here. So I'm going to move some of the stuff around real quick, and then we'll jump into the action. Okay, welcome back to the video. We're going to be concentrating on the 4 main actions in this section. So you'll see I've changed the camera angle a little bit because most of the stuff we're going to be talking about is going to be down here in this area. You don't need to see too much of the main board for this section. So there's going to be 2 main ways to trigger actions in Inventors. So one way is to use your workers, which I'll grab here. There are these little meeples that we had at the start of the setup. So you can use those on your main board, and we'll talk about those in the next chapter where we talk about some of the auxiliary actions. But the other way is to use your dice is over in this section, and you can either place them up here where your camels are, and whoops, sorry, not the phone, or you can place them in your workshop, which is down here. So basically anywhere you see one of these white dice-shaped locations is where you can place a dice. So let's quickly talk about how you use the die. And you'll see down here, and actually let me grab another player board that's not set up just so you can see it better, see what I'm talking about better. So let's fold this here, a little easier to hold. Okay, so this is the study. And when you have a dice over here, you cannot use them, but you can sometimes brighten these dice. And so let's grab, flip this over maybe and look at the brighten emblem. It's a little arrow, okay? So you'll see that around different places. And so when you brighten a dice, you're going to move it up to the next rank. Okay, so for a dice in the study, when you brighten, you'll see these little arrows. You can go to the next level and trigger this, whatever's printed on it, or you can brighten it by bringing it out into this area where you can actually use the dice. So in the study, you'll see you can only have 1 color dice in each level. So it makes it so you can't have like a ton of dice in the study of the same color. You've got to be really paying attention when you bring them out so that you're not wasting die. So out here is the areas where you're going to be able to use the die. So remember down here is the exhausted. There's the ready section. Yep, right here. When you brighten them, you can bring them up here, and they will get to add physically one value to it. And then if you brighten the dice that's in this area up into the inspired area, which is at the very top, you'll see that if it's a colored dice, you gain the influence in one of the guilds that matches the color. And also you'll be able to +5 on the dice and physically change it. So you basically can use that for almost anything. So you have to make decisions on when to brighten dice, when to use them, so on and so forth. But basically any dice you see from here up, you'll be able to use as a trigger for those actions. Okay, so the other thing while I have this board out that I want to show you, let me open it up here. Okay, so there's a nice little guide printed up here, and even the rule book mentions that the 4 main actions are kind of described here in pictures, and where they're highlighted in red is where you're actually going to look at the board or your cards and concentrate there. So it's real important for new players to kind of take a look at this, familiarize themselves with this. As they take their actions, they can look up here, see how it works, because that's going to really help them remember how the actions work. So we'll be using this board, these little things here in a second, so you can see how it really works with the 4 actions on the board. And so if you remember, the 4 actions are invent, build, test, and publish. All right, so first we're going to talk about invent. And real quick, let's look back at the main board down here. Let me size this so we can see it properly. So starting out, you only have these 2 spots for a die. And when you play a die here, you can play 1 or 2. And you'll see why that's important in a second, because sometimes you might need to play a value higher than 6, which will take 2 dice. But you need to be aware that once you place a dice here, say I only do 1, so if I put 1 dice right there, I can't come back later and place a second dice. So you got to decide 1 or 2 dice at a time. Once these 2 spots are filled up, you can't take any more of the main actions unless you have something special down here in your workshop that's going to allow you to do it. You do have these 2 camel spots. This one has a plus symbol on it, and you'll end up getting, let's see, I think you get it in the first round maybe. You gotta open up your tents here. Yeah, here it is, in the first round. So you'll basically unlock more spots. And then you can actually place a worker on a space to unlock this one that has the little flippy arrow. And for that round, you flip it over and you get basically another spot to place dice. And then at the end of the round, it flips back over. So just be aware how many spaces you have left, because definitely found myself having a plan and then realizing, oh, I don't have any more camel spots and I can't even do the plan. All right, so first we're going to take the first action. Like we said, that action is invent. And the invent icon is a little compass here. So let's see if I can find a good view of that for you, because that's kind of hard to see. It's also up here. You can probably tell. When we bring up the other board, you'll see it. So you'll see that over in this stack, the device boards here are empty, and we're going to concentrate on placing cards there, and that's how we invent a device. So that top one we already invented during setup, which was a neutral invention. So we can skip that, but we cannot invent on the device board that already has a card. So we're going to use these other 2 empty boards as a device. So let's look at our chart again, and you'll see that we need to concentrate on this bottom left corner of the device board. We're obviously going to put something there by that little picture. We're going to concentrate on this middle section, and we're going to concentrate on the top right. So we'll talk about what this means in a second. It's basically a bonus if you use a certain color die for this action. But let's grab a device board, and I'll bring it up closer so you can see. So if we want to invent a device on this board, remember we're going to concentrate on the areas that we just pointed out from the drawing, which is this area, the middle, and this top right. So the first thing I want to point out is up here in the top right, this is the cost to invent. So you'd have to play a combination of dice to get 10 or more value. On the dice you would need, you would need to discard one device card along with having 10 or more on the dice. So remember, we start with 2 device cards, but you can get more cards. But in order to play one on this device board, we would need to get rid of one. So let's do that first. So let's look at our dice and place something up here that allows us to get at least 10 value. So if we look at our dice here, and I don't even have anything that adds up to 10. So we're going to cheat. No, actually we're not. We're going to just flip and go to this device board, for our example, because we need 9 plus here. And I've got a 4 and a 5. So I would take something like this that adds up to 9 and place them over here on one of our camel spots. So we've played a 5 and a 4, so I've met that criteria, and now I need to discard a card and choose a card to place here. Alright, so I only have 2 cards, remember that's what we started out with. So one of these we're going to get rid of, and one of them we're going to keep. But how do we decide which one we might want to keep? So there's a couple of things. One, if you're going to build it later, you need to be paying attention to up here. These are the crafts people that will take to build it. If you're going to publish it or build it, you need to pay attention to the scoring down here. And this middle area is where we're going to gain influence by placing it on a certain board. So when you see it kind of matches up with those middle sections, you would get, if no colors matched up like here, you would get no influence tokens. But however, this one, when we place it, the middle one does match. So we get at least 1 black influence. So we're going to choose this card. Okay, so remember we played our dice. We've discarded our card. So this one, we'll get rid of it. And we've played this one down to invent. Alright, so we've concentrated on the part up on the top right. Now we go to the middle. We're going to place our influence. So sometimes you can even get 2 influence to match. I don't think there's any way to get 3. So I would take one of my influence tokens and put them in the black or gray, whatever you want to call it, minaret. So we'll go ahead and move that. And the last thing you want to do is look down here. And remember that's the royalty emblem. And that means because we invented it, we get to move our royalty marker up the track. Remember that's the marker. And there's a reminder with the lightning bolt there. That means you do it right away. And then the last thing we need to do is to take one of our invention tiles, which were those 6 that we placed down in the bottom right. We're going to place it on the card. So as you move invention tiles, you'll uncover certain rewards, whether it be points or resources. You get points for horizontal pairs and resources for or other actions for vertical pairs. So you'll see that's much like the neutral one, but it's got our color on it. So everyone who interacts with this card or device board from here on out knows that we invented it, because we might get some extra points or coins or things like that if people have to interact with this card. So you'll see we keep it in this leftmost column because that's where invented cards go. So it will stay there. It will only move once we build it. There is one thing on this board I'd like to touch on. So you'll see that the orange dice here, and it has a plus device card emblem. So basically for every orange dice you use in triggering the event action, you would get to draw a new device card. So if I played an orange die up there, I could draw a new device card, and that's very helpful because you can actually use that as one of the cards you discard. You can actually draw those cards right away, and then you discard them if you need to for that invention. So be aware of the bonuses. It has one for each action. Well, 3 of the actions. The third action's a little weird. But we'll get to that in time. All right, so I'm going to just grab these and move them back over here as we go on with our sample. So the second action is to build. So if we look at our printed chart, the build icon looks like an anvil. And we're going to focus on that left tile, and we're actually going to be moving it to the right side at the top, hence the little arrow. And we'll have to interact with this little symbol over here. And then for every gray or black dice, we get to refresh a townsperson or a craftsperson. That probably makes no sense to you right now, but it will shortly. All right, so to build a device, it has to be one of the device boards that has a card on it. So you can't build a device board that has no device, and the things in the second column are already built, so you can't rebuild one of those. So we're going to have to build this one, or the bottom one. So there's a couple things that you've got to look at here. We'll just bring the same one up towards the camera. So again, much like the cost to invent was here, now that the card is over that, we have a cost to build it. Again, it has a dice value, so this one is 7+. So you need to use a combination of dice up in your camel spot to at least get 7. And then you have 3 emblems to the right of the dice. And these emblems match the town or craftspeople that are down here in your tower. So for this one, it needs a brown, a black, and a blue. Okay, so now we're going to concentrate on the tower and the craftspeople. I'm going to see if I can zoom this in without causing too much of a problem here. All right, so here's the tower that you saw us put out at the beginning. Some of the craftspeople are flipped over with emblems showing, some are not, like these two. So that means that we have to refresh them before we can use them. So we talked about how for every black die you use in triggering this, you can refresh a craftsperson. So if you need to use this black or blue, and in this instance we actually do, we would really need to use at least 2 black die so that we could refresh these. If we waited the turn, we could use our town, or our workers, on the main board. So remember, you've got these workers. They can actually go refresh the craftspeople for you. But for this example, we're just going to flip these over and pretend that they're done, that they're refreshed. So according to our card, we need to use a brown, a black, and a blue. So how to use them? Well, you basically have to pay them. So there's a cost over here, and you'll see this. I'll actually bring this one up because there's nothing on it. Cost here is what's above the green. Don't focus on the green right now. So this one basically says $1 for every worker. Sorry, I keep calling them workers. That's going to be confusing. They're craftspeople. So depending on what level they're at, they get more expensive. So if you need to pay this brown guy, down here, he would be $1. The black would be $1, and the blue would be $1. So we need to pay $3 in order to build this card that we discussed. So when you pay the money, you pay it to the bank. And by using them, you take them and flip them over and move them up a level. So once you've moved them up, you'll see that they have to be refreshed to use them again. Now they cost $2.
because they're more expensive. It's as if they have learned their craft better. So that's how the craftspeople work. See, it is more expensive there, $2. So, all right, we're going to zoom this back out, get it situated again for us to see. All right, so looking at our card again, so we've paid the dice value, we have paid the craftspeople. So now this has been built. You can take your influence after moving it into the built pile. You'll place it on the board right here to show that you built it. The color below shows who invented it. So we'll place that there to show who built it, because that is going to matter when it comes to publishing. And then because we built it, we're going to trigger this action. So whoever invented it actually gets to take this action as well. If that was an opponent, they would get to take the action. So they're getting a reward for inventing, but because it's blue, and that's ours, we would get to draw 2 device cards. And then once this action is taken, remember the little drawing said that you're going to flip this. So you'll take it and you'll flip it to the back side, which looks like this, and place it in the top right. And so it looks very similar to the one we built up here, the neutral one. Obviously, the neutral signifies that nobody actually owns it. It's just a way of kind of getting the game started. But they do look the same, but you can see that ours has a blue line to show that we invented it. All right, so we've looked at inventing, we looked at building. So we're going to pause for a quick second so I can return some of this to where it needs to be, and then we'll jump into the third action, which is testing. Okay, welcome back. I've moved the camera around just slightly so we can talk about the third action, which is going to be testing. And I'll grab the other board that we've been using real quick, and you can see the emblem for the testing is going to be this little pulley system. Again, if you played Scholars of the South Tigris, you'll definitely find that symbol familiar, and a few of the other symbols as they're used in that game as well. But so I've moved the camera so you're going to be able to see this river section up here, because that is important to the testing action. So the testing action is slightly different in that you are actually not going to use one of your colored die up here in the little action field. So if you watch previous chapters, you'll remember that the 2 camel spots over here that have the white squares are places where we put the dice. And so for testing, you are not going to use a colored dice up there. The testing acts just slightly different in another way as well. You can only test things that are already built in this column or published in this column, which will eventually be device boards right there, but we haven't got to the publish action, so that third column is not there. So just be aware that testing can happen in either of those, but you can't test something in the first column. The other thing is that testing doesn't necessarily give you points at all right off the bat, and it is actually very beneficial to whoever built or published the tested card. So it's going to improve their points that they get from that device at the end of the game. So for the most part, you're probably going to want to be testing things that you have been the builder for or that you have been the publisher for, based off of whose color is there. But testing does give the person who takes the action a way to travel down the river. So again, we move the camera so you can see the river, and there are going to be other ways you can move your boat, but testing is one of those ways. And if you're really hard to move your boat for some reason, then you can certainly test in order to achieve that. So let's look at our board. So the way testing works is that what I mentioned is on this top row that we want to focus on here is that one, it does have a bonus, it does not have a bonus like the other ones using a certain colors. you're going to have this reminder that just states you're going to grab a white die because you're actually going to be losing a color die in the process. So why do you need to choose or grab a white die? So when you use the die on the camels, and then eventually we'll talk about the workshops, at the end of the round you're going to get those dice back, bring them back over to your exhausted area, and eventually you'll get to use them again. But when you place the die on the board to be tested, you're not going to get that dice back. And typically I think the game starts you out with, I think, 11 die, and there's a way to get a 12th die further down the line. But it's not one of these games where you're like ramping up your pool of die or losing a lot of dice. You're really going to hover around that 11 or 12. And so with testing, you're going to be swapping out one of these. So when you want to test, you're going to put a white die from the bank over here. And it doesn't really matter what value you put it on, because the white die is going to just move back to your exhausted at the end. And once you've done that, you can pick one of your colored die in one of the spots, ready, or any of those other spaces you can use. And you're going to put it right here on the testing field. So in this case, I might want to put it here because I actually built this one instead of putting it on the top one. So I'd get points at the end of the game for that. So once you place your die there, you're going to look first at this row. If there's a little asterisk influence token, you would get to place an influence in that color minaret. But in our case, you'll see it has no emblem there, so I'd not get to get any additional influence placed in one of the minarets. And then I'm going to move my boat to however many spaces it says there below the action space. So in this case, it's 3. So we would go 1, 2, 3. Now I'm not going to get into how the river works just yet. We'll talk about that in the next chapter. But as far as testing is concerned, that's how the action works. Now the only thing to look at is if someone comes along after this 2 was placed and they would like to test either blue or black, they have to make sure their die that they place is equal to or higher than the value that's there. So you couldn't come in here with a 1 value blue and put it there. So you have to be aware of that, because if you do place a higher, like a 6 there, you're limiting yourself to only testing with 6s from here on out for the device board. But it is a way to kind of shut out your opponents from possibly using small dice if you don't think they have anything larger than what you put there. Then obviously the white die up here, once the turn is over, we're going to exhaust that and it's going to come back. So you haven't actually lost the die, you've just really traded a colored die for a white die. So that is testing, and that's how that works. So lastly, we'll jump into publication. I need to rearrange this slightly so you can see the proper way that publication works. All right, so we're going to move on to the last of the main actions here. And so in previous chapters, we've talked about inventing, which is putting a card down. Talked about building, which moves the card in the device board over. You get an influence token here showing that you've built it. We just talked about testing, which allows you to place a dice there. It's going to enable more points for this device board for whoever published and built it. Or if they're 2 separate people, then they'll both get the added points. So the last thing you can do with a device board is publish it. So the publishing icon is this little blue feather quill, and I'll grab that other board and point that out so you can see it. So it's right there. Let me focus. Okay. And so you'll see for the bonus on this one, if you use a blue die in order to trigger this action, for every blue die you use, you're going to get to brighten a die. If you watch the earlier chapters, you'll know that brightening a die means that you get to take a die and either move it out of your study, move it up to the next section, either in the study or in the regular pool. So if you can use a lot of blue die in this situation, you can really affect the dice in your dice pool quite a bit with this one action. So just like the other 3 actions we talked about, you're going to take either 1 or 2 die and place them up here in one of the camel spots. So I'll just bring this 5 back and put it over here, and we'll act as if we never did that. But what are we going to look at during the publication? So again, let's reference our little cheat sheet, and you can probably see how important this thing has been during this video. But on the top here, we're going to look at both the bottom left corner and the top right corner. So it's very similar to what we looked at when we did the invent action. If you'll remember, we basically looked at those same areas. But let's pick up one of our built device boards so we can take a look at it. And let me just grab the card portion first so I don't spill everything. And let's talk about the top right. Let me get it focused. All right, so this is basically going to explain what it costs to publish this. Now the costs are going to be similar, if not the same, across all devices being published. But you have to pay different people depending on who invented it. So the first thing to note is you will always need an 8+ die value. So obviously you got to have 2 dice to put down in the camel area. If you don't have 8, then don't even try to publish. But if we look at our dice pool, we can probably make that. Yep, here's a 4 and a 5. So let's throw those up there to make 9. There we go. And then this tells us we have to pay $1 to the inventor. And so the inventor you'll know by the little blue or red or whoever color behind it. And so if you'll remember, when we did invent this, that one tile was on the one side, down at the bottom. We flipped it up, put it up at the top. So that's how you track who invented it. So remember, we took this, had our blue compass, flipped it up there. Sorry, it's blurry for a minute. All right, so when you are going to publish, you're going to pay attention to whatever color is on there, and you're going to make sure to give that person an extra $1. But because I invented it, I don't have to pay myself an extra $1. All right, so if we go back and look at the top right again, you'll see a certain craft person's emblem is marked here, and they're always going to be on there for publication. I don't remember what job that is, but that one yellow symbol will always be there when you're writing up a publication of the invention. And then you'll also see that random craftsperson emblem, which means you can choose from anybody. To pay, that's up to you. So we talked about craftspeople before in the tower. Here's the one that's going to be needed for publication. But remember that if they are flipped over like this, they are not refreshed and you cannot use them. So you would have to find a way to refresh them. Remember also that depending on what level they are, will tell you how much you have to pay for each of them. And when you do pay the dollars for them, you move them up and flip them over. So I did the yellow guy, I'll do this red guy, paid, flipped him over. There we go. So I paid my $1, moved him up. I satisfied that requirement. I satisfied the dice requirement. We paid the inventor, but in this case it was me, so we didn't have to. So this is now published. We take one of our influence tokens and we place it in that bottom slot and we move it to the published area. So unlike these 2 columns over here that if you're playing solo can only have 3 boards on them. If you're playing multiplayer, you can have 4, I think. But unlike that, the publishing columns, you can have as many columns as you want. You can have as many rows as you want. They're basically just going to sit there. You're not going to be shifting it anymore. And then remember, we still have to look at the bottom left. And so right here, because we flipped that tile earlier, the royalties token is showing again. So we get to now move our royalty token down the track. So in the last chapter we did discuss testing. This is still available to be tested. Someone can still test the blue, someone can still test the black, as long as they have a die that's 2 or more. Now, because I both built and published it, I don't know why anyone would want to test this, because it would just help me out. But you'll see when we're playing the solo game that sometimes the solo opponent makes some interesting decisions, and he or she might choose to test it, which gives us more points at the end of the game. A lot of your scoring is going to be done off of this board here, and I'm not going to completely go over the scoring, but there's a lot of little emblems up here for each column that explains how you score it. And we'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the last chapter. And you'll also get scores based off your different scoring zones down here. So depending on what the device card is, you can get points for those different scoring conditions. And so let me bring one up here. So like this would be for, depending on how high you got that black craftsperson, the first level would be if you got him to level 6, you would get the green points, which is 2 points, I think. If you got him to level 9, you would get the blue points, which are 4 points. Those are printed on the board up here as a reminder above the publishing area. So all those are going to be different, the scoring. Here again is the green spot, and then right next to it is the blue spot for that flag. So you just got to look in the manual for what the different cards are. So it'll be important to kind of work on other device boards, not just your own, because you're going to score points however you help invent, build, or publish it. So you just have to be smart about how you do that, and you're not helping give more points to your opponents. So that's pretty much it for the main actions. On the next chapter, we're going to talk about what I term the auxiliary actions. That's going to include looking at how that river works, looking at the worker placement portion, looking at the workshops that you will find down on the bottom right of your player board. And then finally, how do we handle these tents and the tenting action? So let me rearrange, and then we'll jump into those auxiliary actions and go from there. Okay, so we've gone over the 4 main actions. Now we're going to jump into what I'm terming the auxiliary actions. We're going to focus mostly on the river here and the worker placement spots that run above it. So we've zoomed in. We're going to kind of just talk about this one section, and then we'll jump to the workshop after this. So we kind of talked about using the testing action earlier, where you put the dice down, you get to move your boat. That's kind of the main way you're going to move your ship, but there is one spot that you could place a worker on to move the ship right here. But what happens when you move your ship? What's the point? So if you move your ship for this time, in this example, we'll say twice. So I'm going to take my blue ship here, and I'm going to go 1, 2, and then I'm going to collect this workshop token or tile, whatever you want to call it. So we're going to come back to exactly how that fits into your workshop later. We're going to take whatever the top tile is available. All right, so the next player, or in the solo mode, we'll say the solo player gets to go. The important thing is they cannot stop at a spot that does not have a workshop tile. So they're going to skip any spots that are empty or a spot that has another boat on it. So if the solo player was told to move, again, we'll say twice, then we would grab up the red boat and move it 1, 2, because he doesn't count this spot, and then you would take this workshop tile. All right, so that's a little bit on the movement. The last thing on the movement is for a reason. If you've ever moved past the end here of a section, you're going to immediately stop here, no matter what. Doesn't matter how much you move. So if you're right here near the end of this section and you need to move 2, you're not going to go 1, 2. You're going to stop here at 1. You're going to carry out whatever this means. So this section has some emblems on it. And then the last section over here, which you can't see, but I'll bring one over, has similar emblems, but they're a little different. So you'll basically take the action immediately, and then that is all for your boat. Okay, so if you ever get to the very end of the river, there is a spot that has 9 tiles on it, and you can either take another workshop tile or $2. So that's the main thing about the river as far as picking up workshop tiles go. Now, being in the lead on the river does break some tiebreakers at the end of the game as far as how the influence tokens up here and the minarets work. So you might want to be aware of that. If that's important to you, try to stay out in the lead. Okay, so we're going to come back to those tiles with the blue and red in just a second because they have to do with these worker placement spots. So we talked during setup that you get 2 workers to use up here, and you'll eventually get a 3rd after the first round. Here's our 2. So it really depends on how many players you have when you get that 3rd one. But from the solo perspective, you'll actually get it in the 2nd round. So at the end of the 2nd round, you'll get your 3rd worker. So when you take your turn, if you do not want to place die anywhere in your workshop or on the camels, you can instead take your workers and place them up here. Now there are 2 spots over here that have semicircles, or not really semicircles, they're kind of open circles. That means that any amount of workers can go there. So you're not blocking anybody by going there. You basically go there, trigger that action. So this spot would let you draw a device card, refresh a townsperson, which remember will be taking one of the little guys in your tower like this and flipping them over. That helps you make sure that they get to their spot where you can actually use them to build or publish. And then this this +1 right here means you would take any one of your die on your board that you haven't yet used and improve it by 1 value. So it doesn't mean to brighten it, it just means that you're going to take it and turn it so it is up, from 1 to 2, 4 to 5. This spot here that everyone can use has the ability to brighten 2 die or 1 die twice. And then also, like I just said, take another die or one of those same die and increase it by 1 value. Okay, moving over here to the minarets. There are 3 closed circles under each minaret. And those are going to be 3 actions that you can take where you're actually going to be spending influence. So there's a little minaret here with a slash through it. Again, if you've played any of the other South Tigris games, you'll be familiar with that icon. But this basically, instead of those over there where you just place your worker, get a reward, you actually have to pay something up here to trigger the reward. So if you're going to use this, you've got to at least have 2 influence. You would actually take those off the minaret and pay for them. Sometimes you only have to pay 1 and then say $1. And then this one, because if you get shut out of these 2, then it's a little more expensive. You have to pay 2 influence and $1. So you'll see similar icons. Sometimes you gotta pay townspeople, craftspeople, whatever they're called. Sometimes you gotta discard a card. But just be aware that you're going to be spending influence up here to take these actions. And honestly, influence at the end of the game for each minaret really scores you a majority of points. So, don't just be aware of that when you're buying these actions that you will be spending a lot of influence. Okay, but if you do choose to take one of these spots, what does that mean for you as a player? All right, so as an example, we'll look at this one here in the blue. So I'll put my worker there because I have the most influence there. So I'm going to spend an influence, I'm going to spend $1. So what do I do with it? Okay, so the reward is listed right here. And the first thing on each of these is to take a research tile. So that's your first option. So what's a research tile? Those are the ones down here that we said we'd be coming back to that are kind of blue with a red spot on them. And when you look at them, they have a certain symbol on each side. So this first river section has a little arrow. So what that means is when you play this, it's going to be ongoing for the whole game when certain things happen. The second section has a little tent. What does that mean? So when you place your tent, which we will come to in the next chapter, you would get to activate this and do whatever it says. So that's pretty easy. And then the last section here, I'll bring one over, has a lightning bolt on the back. You'll see right here, which if you played any board game anytime lately, you know typically means that you trigger that action right away. So as soon as you get this, you would get to trigger this action, and then you don't trigger it again. So if you put a worker up here and you pay the amount, how do the research tokens work? So you get to pick any of the river sections that have an empty spot, like this, and you'd fill that leftmost spot. Okay, so in this section, and I couldn't even choose any of the other sections because they're all filled, but I would choose the top 3 of these, and I just grabbed one, but let me just ensuring that this is all right here because I don't exactly remember. Well, let's see. I think you're going to actually grab 3 of them. No, not just one like I mistakenly did. So here's 3. We'll flip them over. You're going to choose which one you want to take. So you go through here, look at the different icons. You know, this one, every time I get to move my token on the royalties track, I get to brighten the die. Okay, so the other 2 tiles you didn't choose go on the bottom of the stack. Do that. And then I put mine in that leftmost empty spot. And I also get to take one of my influence tokens and place it on this leftmost influence spot here, which gets me 3 points at the end of the game. But it also signifies that I control that tile. And so every time this thing happens, which is to move the royalty track, remember this token up here, I get to brighten a die. All right, so let's say your opponent also wants to take this same type of action. So they take a worker, you know, they put it here. We'll say they spend their red influence, they pay a townsperson, and they want to take a research tile as well. So he can choose to place one here because that's the leftmost empty spot of the river. Or if he really likes the idea of this one, he could just place an influence there next to my blue one. So he's getting 1 point at the end of the game, but he does get to mooch off of that tile whenever the royalty thing happens. Now that does not work exactly like that with the solo game. I'm just explaining to you how the research tiles work with multiple people there. So let's say that he actually wants to use that other spot. You know, he would pick up 3, place it down. We'll just pretend. And then you can put one further. So see, this one is the leftmost empty, but it is ahead of his ship. He would have to pay $1 to do that. So they pay a silver and then stick that there, and they would then be able to put the the influence token there and show they controlled it. So that's how the research tiles work. Obviously, you'd be watching to make sure that whatever you did, thing that triggers it, you'd be watching for that to make sure you get to do all those things. If you didn't want to research and you want to place a worker up here, then you would take what's on the right side of the slash, and basically you would gain a new die, and you can see depending on which one you pick, sometimes it's blue, orange, or black. Those would go into your study, and then you get to do this other thing, which sometimes is, make a craftsman upgrade a level, get more cards, whatever it may be. Lastly, for the workers, there are these 3 spots that allow you to place a worker there and spend 1 influence out of each minaret. So they're here. And then you get whatever the reward is. So in this case, you would pay 1 of each, and you get a silver and move your boat 1 spot. So we mentioned the camel with the little flippy arrow. This is the spot where you could place a worker and open up the temporary camel spot. So you'll see that only one worker can get there every game, or I mean every round. So if you put your worker there first, you're going to unlock that spot, at least for the rest of that round, and nobody else can get it. All right, so hopefully the river and the research, the workers make sense from an auxiliary action standpoint. The last thing we're going to look at is the workshops on your main board, because that's your other option to place a die if you don't want to place a die in the camel spots. All right, so awesome. We're going to jump into the workshop now. And so this is back on your main player board. You're to the right of your tower. And you basically have 3 rows here of workshops. At the very beginning of the setup, you did get a gray workshop tile. And you had to choose which row to put it in. We placed it here. So we placed it there. You probably didn't understand why we placed it there, but hopefully you'll now learn what this means. So if you have die you want to play, but you might have already played all of your camel spots, but you still have dice left, you don't want to just go the next round and not get to use them. The workshops give you a spot to use them. And the requirement that you meet is whatever number is listed here in the kind of right corner of the workshop tile. So for example, well, first, these are pre-printed and they're all pre-printed on every board. But so example, this row here, I'd need a combination or a single 4 to trigger this row. So if I wanted to place a 4 here, then I would get to either upgrade a craftsperson or place an influence into one of the colored minarets. At the end of the round, this would go back and exhaust. So you do get it back, but not immediately in the next round to use. Now let's look at one of the rows that has 2 workshop tiles. So if you place the die here, and say I placed the same 4, I met this requirement, which is a 1. So I could do this, which is brighten a die twice or brighten 2 die and add 1. But I did not meet this requirement because I did not use an orange die. So let's swap this 4 out and say I did something like this. So now I've met this requirement because they need to be a 1 or higher. And I've met this requirement because this one here needed an orange die. So I would get to do both of these actions. So the different workshops are going to have different types of actions on them. But like this one here means at the end of the round, all the dice I used in this workshop are going to go back to the readied status. Remember, the little moon is readied. It does not go back to the exhaust position. So that's a nice way to get your dice back. Instead of them going exhausted, you just speed up your chance of being able to use those dice. So there's a couple that are similar to this. Like there's ones that the camel dice would go back to ready, not exhausted, but you'll just have to look through the rule book at the different workshop tiles. So we did grab in the last section a workshop tile off of the river. That's what this one was. So when you gain a workshop tile, we can now choose to place it in the leftmost open spot of any of the rows. So if I place it here, then on future turns, if I place at least a 4 or higher, then I get to trigger this, and because obviously 4 is higher than 3, I'd get to trigger that. Now there are some printed rewards on here already. So instead, if I chose to place it here and I covered up this, I would automatically get this reward as soon as I placed it down, which is an orange die. And then you would see now that I need to have at least a 3+ die to trigger this one. And again, it would need to be orange, or it would need to be paired with an orange to trigger that middle tile. So the only real big thing to note about the workshop tiles is that you do not have to trigger them left to right. You can trigger them in any order, but you just trigger them once. So I bring that because you might say you meet all 3 requirements, but this one might actually give you $1, which you need to pay for this one to trigger this one. So it's a little confusing, but you just are going to go in the order that is going to make the synergy work for you to activate as many tiles as you can in that row. Don't be locked into having to go left to right. Okay, so the next chapter we're going to look at tinting and kind of what the end of a round looks like. And then we will, well, and also tinting doesn't have to be at the end of a round, but it's usually close to the end of the round. So we'll explain all that. And then we're going to zoom the camera back out and jump into an actual playthrough and look at what these solo cards do.
Alright, welcome back to this last chapter of the video where we will hopefully pull everything together that we've gone over in the last couple chapters and show you exactly how a few turns work and go over the solo automa cards over here. We'll talk about that as we have not, and we'll kind of just see what happens as we go through the game. So remember, we are playing solo. So that means we have a dummy player, and if you didn't watch the setup, the dummy is in yellow, where the solo opponent is in red. And you will use the dummy if you're playing with 1 or 2 people. So if you're planning on playing this multiplayer with like a partner, then you will need this dummy character. So make sure that you're paying attention there. So we are going to jump right into the first turn. And if you are playing with a dummy character, then you're going to flip over the top dummy card first. So we'll flip this over and I'll show you what it looks like here. All right. So you're going to basically use all this information. So right off the bat, we're going to look up here and it's going to tell us 3 places to put the dummy's influence. So it wants to place 2 in the blue and 1 in the black. So we'll do that. We'll grab these. And the influence for the dummy is basically going to work